A royal silence breaks. In the tallest tower of the imperial spire, where the winds of the upper stratosphere whispered secrets only the stars could hear, Princess Alira of the Lurethi Empire sat upon the throne of light. Her gown shimmered with fibers of solar silk, alive with the pulse of 1,000 suns, and yet her expression was calm, untouched by the glow. The chamber around her curved like the inside of a comet shell, ancient and vast, echoing with the soft footsteps of diplomats and dignitaries who dared to speak in her presence. But this day, like many before, ended in silence. The last suitor had just bowed and departed, his voice still hanging in the air like stale perfume. Empty promises, another name to forget. He had come from the Velneri Syndicate, offering trade routes, stardust weapons, and rare mineral alliances. Before him, the Zorik's Dominion had offered 5 of their moons and a fleet of cloaked dreadnoughts. And yet, Alira had dismissed them all with a single phrase: "You speak of power, but not purpose." Her advisors watched her now, confused and frustrated. General Kale, old and sharp as a blade, shifted uncomfortably in his crystalline armor. "Your Highness, with respect, you've rejected offers that could ensure Lurethi dominance for the next 100 cycles. Are we to believe you're waiting for something greater?" Alira didn't answer at first. She stood and walked toward the observation arch at the far end of the throne room, her footsteps silent on the polished obsidian floor. Beyond the glass shimmered the city of Valtros, lights glittering like constellations brought to earth. Floating platforms and spire-bound bridges swirled in graceful loops through the sky. And deep below, rivers of liquid light carved their way between districts like veins of a living world. "I'm not waiting for something greater," she said softly, her reflection shimmering beside the stars. "I'm waiting for something different." High Minister Ilun stepped forward, his long scrolls of protocol dragging behind him. "We've exhausted every known empire. All powerful suitors have come forward. What more could you be seeking, Princess?" She turned, her golden eyes gleaming like twin auroras. "Every offer has spoken of technology, weapons, and territory. But not one has spoken of courage. Not one has dared ask why I rule, or what I dream of. They want to possess, not understand." The chamber fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the low hum of anti-grav columns. Many had wondered what made Princess Alira so stubborn, why she refused to bind her empire to any of the galactic powers that came crawling with riches and fleets. But no one truly knew what she was searching for, because no one had ever asked. Then, a chime echoed through the room. It was sharp, crisp, and unfamiliar. One of the palace's communication sentinels flickered to life, casting a soft blue glow over the floor. "Your Highness," the sentinel announced, "a ship has entered the outer sector of the Lurethi core zone. It is requesting docking protocols." Kale stiffened. "Another suitor." Ilun frowned. "Impossible. We have no scheduled visits for another 5 cycles." Alira raised a hand, and the projection expanded into a rotating image of a vessel. It was small, no larger than a cargo barge, and unarmed. There were no imperial insignias, no known signatures from any established power. It bore a name in simple Earth Latin script, not encoded galactic glyphs. "Odyssey," she read aloud. "From Sol System." Kale squinted. "Humans?" Another murmur rippled through the chamber. A few younger scholars exchanged confused glances. The humans were a minor species, barely known to most empires. A post-industrial civilization that had somehow clawed its way into deep space with patchwork ships and stubborn ambition. They had no great technologies, no fleets, no claim to galactic councils. "What are they doing in the core zone?" Ilun muttered. Alira stared at the ship's data for a long time. The crew count was 12. The ship bore exploration credentials, not diplomatic or military tags. No shields, no quantum disruptors. And yet it had navigated through volatile grav belts and wormhole rifts that even established empires avoided. "They're not here to offer," she said quietly. "They're here to discover." Ilun stepped forward in protest. "Princess, forgive me. But this is absurd. They're insignificant. Their presence is an intrusion, not a declaration. Elira's voice turned sharp. Then why do I feel something I haven't felt in years? Kale looked at her curiously. And what is that, Highness? Wonder. She turned back to the sentinel. Grant them landing clearance. Prepare the guest atrium. I want to meet them myself. Shock rippled through the room like a solar flare. Elin began to object again, but Kale raised a hand, silencing him. His eyes, older and more observant than most, watched the princess carefully. He had seen many rulers rise and fall, but he had never seen Elira's gaze shine with such strange light. Beyond the palace domes, the sky stirred as the Odyssey adjusted course. Its hull bore the scars of long travel, its thrusters glowed with overworked energy, but it moved with purpose. As it broke through the clouds of Veltrax 9, the auto-guidance locks of the Lurathi beacon sensed with it. The princess watched it descend like a whisper from the void. And for the first time in countless cycles, she stepped away from her throne not as a ruler, but as someone who felt a question forming in her soul, a question she hoped this strange little ship might answer. The stranger from Sol. The Odyssey sliced through the clouds of Veltrax 9 like a wandering spark drifting into a storm of giants. Below, the capital city of Voltros stretched like a glowing labyrinth, spires of glass and stone lit by bioluminescent rivers and drifting orbital gardens. The ship trembled slightly, not from turbulence, but from the awestruck silence that filled its command deck. Captain Elias Rain sat at the helm, his hands steady on the controls. His dark brown eyes scanned the data feed as automated coordinates locked onto the Lurathi landing grid. The interface was more advanced than anything he'd ever seen, seamless, almost sentient in its precision. But it wasn't fear that sat in his chest. It was curiosity. The same force that had driven him through 3 uncharted systems, past 2 near-death malfunctions, and into the heart of an empire most humans only heard about in whispers. Beside him, First Officer Jun Vega adjusted her collar, the tension in her jaw betraying her calm voice. You really think they'll talk to us? I mean, they have fleets that can erase continents. We've got a fusion drive held together with prayers and duct tape. Ilias grinned faintly. That's the thing, June. They're expecting fleets, but we didn't come to impress. Jun glanced out the viewport. They were descending toward the Lurathi Imperial platform, a structure so vast it dwarfed mountains, floating on a web of magnetic suspension lines. The palace complex rose like a carved memory of something celestial, glowing with gentle blues and silvers. Drones flitted like insects in a coordinated dance, clearing space and adjusting their flight. A voice crackled through the comms, precise and regal. Human vessel Odyssey, you are authorized to land. Exit your ship and proceed to the receiving chamber. Do not bring weapons. Elias responded calmly. Acknowledged. We come in peace. No weapons aboard. Just people. As the ship touched down, the deck hissed beneath it, releasing pressure in small bursts. The outer hatch opened with a quiet groan, revealing a sky painted in violet clouds and golden sunlight. The 12 members of the crew stood ready, scientists, linguists, a medic, and 2 engineers, each wearing simple uniforms with the Earth exploration emblem stitched on their sleeves. No armor, no ornaments, just truth. They stepped out together. Waiting for them was a line of armored guards, their armor curved and organic, like it had grown rather than been forged. At the center stood a woman cloaked in silver-gray robes that shimmered with light only visible at the edge of thought. Her presence was magnetic, her posture regal, yet her eyes were searching. Princess Elira studied them closely. None of them bowed, none of them trembled. They simply stood tall, hands visible, expressions calm. The man in front, clearly their leader, stepped forward with a respectful nod. I'm Captain Elias Rain of the human exploration vessel Odyssey, he said. We didn't come to negotiate or intrude. We came to learn. Elira tilted her head slightly. His words were not rehearsed, not diplomatic, just honest. You crossed 3 empire borders, she said, her voice like water across marble. Passed through forbidden territories, navigated a dark nebula storm, and ignored multiple warnings, all without escorts or guarantees of safety. Why? Elias glanced at his crew, then back at her. Because staying in one place kills the soul. We didn't want safety. We wanted to know what was out here. A quiet ripple moved through the Lurethi observers. One of the guards stepped forward, as if to challenge the tone, but Alira raised a hand, silencing him. You came not to offer something, but to ask for nothing, she said, as if trying to understand her own reaction. Not nothing, Elias replied. We came for understanding, for connection. We've seen ruins of empires, messages left on asteroid walls, and languages we can't decode. We thought maybe, if we reached far enough, someone might answer back. Alira turned, motioning for them to follow. Then walk with me. They moved through the palace gardens, which were suspended mid-air on floating terraces, each filled with flowers that bloomed in response to sound. The path ahead glowed faintly beneath their feet. Elias found himself constantly glancing around, absorbing everything. The subtle architecture, the way energy flowed through the environment like a living organism, the absence of waste or noise. You speak with the hunger of explorers, Alira said, keeping her gaze ahead. But many have come to us saying the same. They cloaked their ambition in curiosity. They wanted what we had. What makes your kind different? Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he said, maybe we're not different. Maybe we're just newer, still too young to pretend we know everything. We haven't stopped being surprised yet. That made her pause. She turned to face him, surprised by everything. The way stars die, the way gravity dances, the way sentient trees on Loris Prime sang in harmony when we walked through their roots. We're still amazed by it all, still afraid, still hopeful. For a moment, Alira didn't speak. Something shifted in her face, something subtle and deep. She had lived surrounded by certainty, by calculated outcomes and centuries of tradition. But here stood a man and his crew who weren't burdened by legacy. They had no map, only questions, and somehow that made them lighter, freer. I once thought wonder was for the young, she said softly, that it would fade when the burden of rule set in. But perhaps it was just hiding, waiting to be seen again. Elias smiled. Then maybe we brought something after all. Far above, a scout ship passed by the sun, casting a momentary shadow over the terrace. Below, in the palace's deepest vaults, alarms continued to blink silently, remnants of older warnings still confused by the human's presence. But on the surface, in the gardens of light and wind, something had already changed. Not a treaty, not a trade pact. Something older, something simpler. A beginning. The corridors of the Lurethi Palace felt more like the inside of a living organism than a structure. Their walls pulsed faintly with biolight, and each step echoed as though the palace itself listened. Captain Elias Rain walked beside Princess Alira in silence, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Everything around him challenged what he knew about architecture, about power, about what civilizations could become. Behind them, the crew of the Odyssey followed, wide-eyed. John Vega marveled at the way the corridor's ceiling seemed to breathe, shifting slowly with the rhythm of footsteps. Dr. Ishan moved like he was afraid to break something sacred, whispering notes into his recorder about the organic technology embedded in the walls. The youngest crew member, technician Marco Quinn, kept staring at a wall panel that reacted to his emotions by changing color. He hadn't touched anything. He didn't need to. The palace saw him. They arrived in a circular chamber with a ceiling open to the sky. Above them, the twin suns of Veltrax 9 danced around each other like eternal partners. The wind that moved through the chamber smelled faintly of burnt citrus and cold metal, an odd yet comforting mix. Princess Alira gestured for them to sit around a smooth table carved from a single crystal slab. There were no guards here, no weapons in sight, only the sound of birds circling the distant towers and the occasional hum of something ancient beneath their feet. "I've called the conclave to witness your arrival," Alira said, seating herself at the head of the table. "You may speak freely here. No protocol. No deception." Elias nodded. "We're not diplomats. We're explorers. Honest words are all we carry." The table responded to their presence, emitting soft rings of light beneath each person. The conclave entered quietly. 12 robed figures, each representing a different branch of Lorethi culture. There was a historian whose robe was woven from scroll text that constantly rearranged, a biologist with an artificial jellyfish floating above her shoulder, an archivist who had replaced his eyes with crystalline lenses capable of recalling entire histories at a glance. One of them, an elder whose face had the patience of mountains, leaned forward. "Why did your kind choose to come here, knowing the odds of survival were so low?" Elias met his gaze. "Because staying in the safe zone of known space was killing our spirit. We've charted our system. We've sent drones into empty voids. But we kept feeling like we were missing something essential, so we decided to stop waiting for certainty." Another conclave member asked, "Is it conquest you seek? A place in the power game of the stars?" Jun laughed under her breath, but Elias stayed steady. "No, we seek something none of the great powers seem to chase anymore. Understanding. The kind that changes us, not the world around us." That stirred the room. It wasn't what they were expecting. Most outsiders came looking to take, to demand, to posture. These humans brought nothing but questions, and strangely, that made them dangerous. Not because of what they had, but because of what they didn't have. Alira studied Elias quietly. His skin was weathered from solar exposure, and his uniform, though clean, was worn at the seams. He was not a man raised in royalty or command by birth. He had chosen this life, fought for it. He wasn't offering her a fleet. He was offering her a mirror. She turned to him. "Then allow me to ask a question in return." He nodded. "Ask anything." "What do humans do when they fail?" That took him off guard for a moment. It wasn't a question about engines or governments. It was personal. "We adapt," he said finally. "We mourn. We curse. We break things. But then we try again. That's who we are. We fall hard, and we rise harder. And when you lose," he smiled slightly, "we learn. Losing teaches more than victory ever does. That's how we became who we are, because we had to earn every inch of sky." Alira looked down at her hands. The throne she had inherited had never tested her the way failure tested others. She had grown surrounded by expectation, by polished protocol and power that had always worked. And yet, none of it had prepared her for the slow, creeping emptiness that had haunted her reign for years. "I was taught that failure is weakness," she said quietly. Elias leaned forward. "Then maybe you were taught wrong." A long silence followed, not heavy, but thoughtful. Then, to everyone's surprise, Alira smiled. "Perhaps I was." The conclave murmured, intrigued. The humans had not only survived their arrival, they were changing something. The air felt lighter, more curious. Alira stood. "You will be guests in my palace for the next cycle. Explore, ask, learn, and if you're willing, teach." Elias stood as well. "We didn't come to teach, princess, but we'll share what we have." As they were led to their chambers, the palace's lights shifted subtly to welcome them. The living walls opened softly, revealing living quarters that adjusted to each guest's biology. Beds formed themselves from memory foam, food dispensers scanned their nutritional needs, and the room's ambient temperature shifted to suit the occupant's comfort zone. Marco sat on the edge of his bed, stunned. "They didn't just study us. They understood us." Ishan whispered, "They've been watching." Jun stood near the window, looking out at the twin suns. "No, they've been waiting." That night, as the crew of the Odyssey rested beneath a foreign sky, Princess Alira stood alone in the gardens again. She looked up, watching the stars blink quietly above her world. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she ruled a kingdom. She felt like she stood at the edge of something infinite. And just like that, the story of Lorethi changed. Not through war or conquest, but through a single ship that asked a different kind of question.